Wow, everybody was here ahead of me. Let's see what we got here. Well, not everybody. We're still missing a couple. There's one more. All right, I think we got maybe one missing now. Yep, all but one. Okay, cool. All right, I'm working with a new lighting setup here, and I feel like I'm going to give myself a suntan. Just this, trying to take up a little less space in here, but that light's pretty bright. I think it's like a 300 watt video light that I used to use doing video production years ago, and I forgot how bright it was. Anyway, I think I look a little red already. Got a little suntan starting already. So we're going to look over, obviously we're going to look over your assignments that you turned in first. But I'm not sure if we should just go into that and then sort of back into the PDF files that I posted, because they kind of go hand in hand. Maybe that's the way to go. What I'll ask you is, when we look at your images, to kind of let me know, first of all, what challenges you faced in trying to create them. And I know some of you were trying to do it on a cell phone, and that's certainly a challenge. But anything else that might have created an obstacle for you, something that maybe you didn't anticipate, a problem that you had to solve or whatever. And then, excuse me, also, what did you learn by doing it? Either the assignment or in the PDF files, which I know you all went and read immediately after class, right? That was like so burning on your mind to go do that. But what, was there anything in there, I guess, and we'll do this on an individual basis as we look at your images, but just kind of be thinking in your head, was there anything in those files that either taught you something or confused you or something you're not clear on? And how did that relate to the assignment, that you did? And again, what challenges or obstacles you might have faced? So let's go start looking at those. Okay. So it's funny. People figure out pretty quickly that the folders are ordered alphabetically, and that's usually the way we start through them. So it's funny, I see people starting to name them with their last name first so they don't go first, or whatever, or maybe it's just coincidence, but I see that a lot. But anyway, Brooke, you actually are up first. Let's take a look and see what we have here. Everything seems to be running a little slow right now, so bear with me. Not sure what's going on. Here we go. Okay, so let's make these a little bigger. So you submitted two images, or I'm sorry, one for the blurred background, the aperture test, and then two for the movement. Let me take a real quick look at something. Yeah, so you did use an iPhone for these. So tell me, first of all, about whatever challenges you faced in trying to create these, especially with a cell phone, because you did it. You definitely have a foreground subject silhouetted or isolated against a blurry background, and then in at least one of the other images, we have some definite motion showing. So tell me what you, again, anything from the PDF files that might have helped you, hindered you, confused you, and then what challenges you faced in doing this.
So with the challenges, I couldn't get the background in the Aperture one to unfocus. So I just went and edited it myself. So it still had the same thing, but it wasn't the actual camera doing that.
So let me ask you before you go on, your iPhone, does it have a portrait mode on it?
Yes, but I completely forgot about it.
So if you've used it before, what's the first thing you notice when you go into portrait mode? There's an obvious visual difference right off the bat. Can you tell me what that is?
Isn't it like a different?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Brooke.
It does blur the background, doesn't it?
It does, but there's even more than that. Like what I'm getting at is how it does it. Because when you switch, there's an immediate visual difference, and it's not just the blurry background. There's something else. Do you remember what it is? If you don't, we'll get somebody else and see if they do know. Anybody else want to chime in?
I have an idea.
Go ahead.
So when you put it on, it'll have this figure that you're supposed to put your focus in, and then it'll blur. It zooms in almost.
That's what I was getting at. You notice that, like, from where you're at, if you have a shot composed and you go into portrait mode, immediately you feel like you need to back up, right? Because it zooms in on. So the reason that's important is because what it's actually doing is changing lenses. In order to, well, not in order to, but it certainly helps in looking to blur a background to have a longer focal length lens. So for example, if you're using, a regular camera, regular digital DSLR, it's going to be a lot easier with, say, a 200 millimeter lens to blur the background than it is with a 50 millimeter lens, or even wider. And it has to do, and the cool thing about what the iPhone teaches you when you do that is that it has to do with subject distance, camera to subject distance. So one of the things that we'll talk about a number of times this semester is that there's a 3-point system in place here. You have the camera, you have your subject, and you have your background. And the distance between those three, and not just the distance, but the ratio of distance between those three, will dramatically control depth of field with any given lens. So for example, let's assume, and I don't have a graphic to show you, but let's just assume, we've got the camera here, on the left side of the screen, the subject is in the middle, and then the background is on the right. So all three are about the same distance from each other. The background's about the same distance from the subject as the camera is from the subject. If you change one of those, if you pull the subject closer to the camera and further from the background, then the background's going to go more out of focus. And it's not because of distance so much as it is the ratio. The camera and the subject are now closer together. So it changes how you focus on that. If the subject is back here and you focus on the camera and then you move the subject in, the subject's out of focus, right? So you have to refocus on that. And what happens is that change creates more depth between the subject and the background. So what happens on the iPhone is that it actually changes lenses, or the focal length of the lens that it uses, to a longer lens. And it forces you to back up a little bit, and it automatically changes that ratio of that distance between camera, subject, and background. And so it's just one of the things to realize, that you can actually, with any camera, you can make the background blurrier without changing anything on your camera or on your lens, but just simply by changing that ratio, that distance from your camera to your subject, and then the subject to the background. Think about it. If your camera's here and your subject is literally right in front of your background, well, they're both going to be in focus, right? Because you're pretty much focused on the same spot. As that subject moves closer to the camera and further from the background, then that background gets a little blurrier. But so congratulations on figuring out a way to do this without, going into that. I mean, that you took the hard way, you took the long way around, but you got it done. So, yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of understanding that little principle. And with a cell phone as opposed to a camera, it is a lot more difficult to achieve. But so I kind of give you credit for thinking outside the box there, at least, and getting it done.
Yeah, I always take the hard way for some reason.
So this one says bonus movement, and
Yeah.
tell me about this shot.
I like the third one. I like the snow in the light and how it kind of looks like when you're going into hyperspeed in Star Wars. I like that, but I thought maybe everyone else would do that. And I was walking back to my dorm and I saw that someone absolutely biffed it and was sliding on the ice. And I thought it was a different interpretation of movement. And that's what the
Gotcha.
skid marks are.
Okay, so I saw that, but I wasn't sure of the thought process you were using for that. So yeah, again, good idea in recognizing that. Good job in recognizing that. There's nothing in the image that's actually moving, but what you did was photograph the evidence of it. So yeah, pretty good idea for that. And you're right. This one, this looks for getting a shot like this with a phone. That's pretty good. I mean, this reminds me, like you said, of a couple of things. One being, as you're punching it into, warp drive or hyperspace or whatever. It also looks like probably this would have been the first 20 minutes in Starry Night. Like as he first started to paint Starry Night, this might have been how it looked after about 20 minutes, and then he kept going, But so tell me, what was your light source here?
I was down by the gym and where you go down the stairs, and there was the big spotlight above me, and I just looked up and it was the perfect lighting to catch this.
Yeah, so it also is interesting that you kept the light source out of the photo, which I like that. It creates a little bit more mystery. We don't really need to see everything at the bottom of that image because the subject is really the snow coming down. And backlighting is one of the easiest ways to highlight snow. Again, good time of day to do it too. It looks like it was probably twilight or dusk or somewhere around that. And so that created that contrast that you needed. Not everybody did this. In fact, I don't think anybody else did it but you.
Really?
Yeah. At least from what I remember from going through, I could be wrong, but I don't think anybody else did. Well, there was one shot I remember out a window. It's a little bit different. It does involve snow, but it's a little bit different than this. This was probably, I thought, as far as motion was concerned, probably one of my favorite images this week. So, the thing that I liked about all three of these images is that your thought process was good. Like you were thinking, you came up with a way to solve the problem, and you recognize things as you came upon them. And that's really one of the things as a photographer that it's a skill that not everybody can hone, in being that aware and being able to recognize things as being photogenic. So that's pretty good. I think all three of these you did a good job with. I did not recreate yet. Let me do that now. My folder that we can place these in. And so I agree with you. I think that this picture of the snow is probably the best of the three. I like the idea behind the other snow shot, and I like the fact that you were creative with the first one. But visually, and as far as satisfying the assignment, this is definitely, unless you disagree, that's definitely your best image. All right, good job, Brooke. All right,
Thank
so we are on to Carly next. So again, a couple of good ideas here. I kind of like the idea of mundane subject matter being converted into something a little more interesting. So
So the backstory is that between my house and a shopping plaza is like a city park, and that's where I went to take these pictures. And I just saw the shopping cart right there in the middle of the park, and I was like, "Ooh, interesting."
yeah, and it looks like it's not going anywhere fast because I can see the snow build up around the base of it. So there's two things that strike me about this right off the bat, and I'm going to ask the rest of the class if you see anything, um, the two things that I might be referring to that make this a little more visually interesting. Anybody want to take a stab at it? One of the things stems from a comment that I made last week when we were reviewing images. Zach, you look like you kind of had an idea there.
Yeah, I mean, I think what makes it like really cool is, I mean, well, first of all, like the red just pops with like all the white snow around it. And then also obviously the angle in which she took the picture is kind of funky and cool too.
You nailed both of them. That's exactly what I was going for. One was because I said earlier that if you're going to tilt the camera, either tilt it a lot or not at all, because if you go off a little bit, it just looks like an accident. So this was clearly, an intentional, unless you were literally falling down when you took it. And then the
No,
other, I didn't think so. And then the other thing is the color contrast. So everything in this image, for the most part, is this very dull, boring gray, which is what we get this time of year atmospherically around here. And then it's set off, even the cart and the background are very neutral. And then it's set off with this bright red from the cart. Compositionally, it's not, there's nothing stunning about it as far as composition is concerned, but the angle being so extreme does make you look at it and wonder, why did she choose to do that? Why did, so it forces the viewer to come up with something in their mind, because we like answers to questions. We don't just like questions, right? Everybody, my ex-wife used to be like, if we would drive past a construction site, not construction so much, but like, I don't know, they're digging up the road, let's say. If we would drive past that 2 or 3 days in a row and they were doing the same thing every day, it would drive her nuts. Like, she'd want to know what's going on here. And if she couldn't find out the answer, she would make it up. She, in her head, she would be like, oh, okay, so they're probably pouring a new sidewalk here because I remember there was a water break, 6 months ago, or, she had to have an answer in her head. So we kind of visually do the same thing. We subconsciously recognize that we have a question and we want to answer it. So in my case, I might say, well, one of two things. Either she was falling down when she took it, or there's got to be another reason. And I would try to figure out, what do we see? What do we not see? And sometimes that's just as important. What do you not see in an image? You don't see the whole bottom of this. You don't see the front of it. Is there something that was there that's cropped out? What could it have been? I don't know. Just all those little things. In the long run, it's a picture of a shopping cart. It's not rocket science, but it still kind of forces you to look at it and just kind of tilt your head and wonder. And that's the other thing. When you have something that's on that extreme of an angle, you do kind of find yourself, like physically moving your head to try to figure it out. So I like everything that you did. It's not something that you're going to probably win first place in any photo contest with, but it not only satisfied the assignment, but it did so in a little bit of a visually interesting way. So I appreciate that. And then so I was looking at the metadata on these files, and probably something we should talk about as we go through. So this one, I'm going to guess that your intention was to freeze the motion, right? Because he's moving on the swing. And the reason, so how would I know that? What is it that tips me off? Well, I don't know how well you can see the smaller aspects of the screen here, but in the upper left-hand corner here, not all the way up, but right in this area is in the metadata area, it's showing me her aperture, her shutter speed, and her ISO. And the shutter speed is a 2,000th of a second. That's pretty fast. So my guess when I look at that is, oh, she wasn't trying to get him blurred and missed. My guess is that she was trying to freeze the motion because the shutter speed is so fast. And hey, I was right. Give me a gold star. And so again, you have a little bit of what I'm starting to see anyway is a tendency. I don't know. I'm not going to call it a style because I don't know that it is yet, but it's definitely a tendency, and it is in your cropping to be a little tighter, to be a little closer, to not show, because some people might have thought of an image like this and pictured it back and showing in the whole body and all of that. I don't know if there's if you do that consciously, but I do see that in both of these first two images, especially, and a little bit in the third one as well. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm just saying it's something that I notice, and I'll kind of, some people just have that tendency. They like things better that way. In this case, because there's motion, it creates a little tension because he's actually headed towards the edge of the screen and you don't see all of him. And, it's almost like, he's going to, if you'd waited a half second, he would have been out of the picture, altogether. Probably not, but because if he'd been out of the picture, he probably would have gone over the bars. Did anybody ever do that when they were a kid? That's a scary thing, to actually try to get the swing to go over. I don't know that I ever did it, but I got close a couple of times, and it scares the bejesus out of you, let me tell you. All right, enough side story on that. Anything else about this image, Carly, that you want to tell us?
I mean, my brother just was not happy about me telling him to get on the swing. It was like, Josh, get on the swing. What? Why? Just do it. He was not a fan of it.
Yeah, usually with family, you have to bribe them with something. Family and pets, you have to bribe them. That's the one thing that I kind of noticed going back, starting 2-3 years ago when I first started teaching this, is the difficulty in finding portrait subjects because everybody that's around you is disinterested. Like they don't want to be part of it. They don't want to help. But it looks like he did.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, sorry. It does look like he cracked a little bit of a smile here. Like, he's trying to be badass, but yet,
Oh my God.
a little something came through.
Oh my lordy.
I think somebody might not be muted that wants to be, but let's see how
Sorry.
that goes. That's okay. So then your third one, and again, if I look at this, the shutter speed on this is now a 4,000th of a second, which is way faster. I'm assuming that's intentional because what we have is this frozen snow being shaken off the branch, which I wouldn't have gotten exactly if it wasn't for the hand in the lower right-hand corner. I think that was pretty cool to include that rather than just show the snow falling. It answers that question, what's happening, why is it happening, and all of that. But yet it still makes us focus on the falling snow. And a 4,000th of a second is going to be fast enough in any circumstance to freeze that. If you look, also, I'm sure this was not intentional. It's probably an accidental, fortunate thing that happened to you, is that from just below where that branch is up, that whole background is that, very featureless white sky. But where the snow's falling down below, it actually has some contrast and some density to it. If that had been all white back there, it would have been really tough to see the snow. I don't know if it was something you noticed consciously when you did that or not, but it
I
definitely
noticed
worked out.
it after, but I had like a similar picture and then a different area in the park, and it was just all white, and it was like, I cannot see the snow, so I need to find somewhere else.
And so that speaks to what I was asking about, what challenges did you face? Kind of keep me, I like to hear that. I like to hear, if you tried something and it didn't work, and then how you figured that out and changed it. So yeah, you would have, had you been in another area and not had that background, I think anybody would have probably looked at the picture and went, not really getting it, not getting it done here, and figure out that, well, we need something a little darker back there. And that's a huge issue with a lot of amateurs, is that they're not conscious of the background. They're not conscious of, we get so fixated on our subject, because when we're there taking the picture, we're in 3 dimensions, and we can see things. Our brain knows exactly what's happening. But when we're trying to represent that to somebody who wasn't there, and we're using only 2 dimensions, it's easy to miss that stuff. And even us, when we look at it later, we were there. So we know we don't really necessarily see the things that somebody else will see or not see when they look at a photo. So it's a good job of, if you can get to the point where you do recognize those things, either before you take the picture or immediately after, and go, oh, I need to fix this. That's a really good thought process. So of the 3, what do you like the best?
It's either the snow or the shopping cart. So whichever one you're.
I'm probably just simply I love the snow as far as the satisfying the assignment, but I think visually this one is probably a little stronger because of the color contrast. And we haven't talked about color contrast yet. It's actually one of the compositional elements that we'll get into in the next few weeks. But a couple of you did it really, really well this week. How intentional it was, I don't know. But there's a couple of images that we're going to see as we go through this that really nailed color contrast really well. This was one of them, by the way. All right, so good job there.
Thank you.
Hannah's up next. So we've got, and again, don't forget to tell me, especially with this bottom image, I'm going to guess that you might have some horror story about how hard it was to do. But let's talk. Well, I know how horrible this was because it looks cold.
Yeah, it was.
And I am not a fan of cold. I think I've maybe mentioned that about 5 or 8 times so far. It's interesting. I just noticed the color in the water coming down on the right. I wonder what caused that.
So this is a waterfall that's like on the way up toward Ogleby, and there's
Right.
a local guy, and he dyes the ice in the middle of winter.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
So like normally the entire thing is dyed, but by the time we made it up there, most of the color had already washed away because of the rain.
So I like the fact that you can still see motion. There is still water coming across it, even though a lot of it's frozen, and you can see the motion in that. Your shutter speed on this is a 40th of a second. Were you hand holding the camera?
Yeah.
And this was, it was a Canon Rebel. Yeah, even a slower shutter speed would have been cool for the water, but it would have been almost impossible probably to hand hold without getting a lot of camera movement in it. But I do see the motion in the water coming over. I didn't know that about the dye. I guess maybe again, I hate the cold so much that I never go there in the wintertime. That's a summertime spot for me. I've shot there many times under the falls. It is. Have you been down there? Like, it is not the easiest thing to get down there. Like, there's no trail or anything. If you want to get down there, you're going to get yourself a little dirty, and it's tough to carry gear down there because of the rough terrain, but it is a cool spot.
Yeah.
I think visually, the only thing that bothers me here a little bit, two things. There are two slight, what's the word? Distractions. Anybody want to shout them out?
I think the bush in the front is kind of distracting.
Yeah, actually, when I first looked at this image, I actually thought of it more as the aperture exercise, because she had focused on the waterfall, and then the foreground went out of focus, which is a little bit backwards of what we normally would try to do. You would want your subject to be in focus and then what's blurry to be behind, but this would have been a different take on it. But then I think, Hannah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this was more a case of just with the conditions the way they were, not really being able to get where you wanted to get to do
Yeah,
that.
that's exactly it.
Yeah. So, but you're right. The bush in the front, the dead bush is a little bit of a distraction. If I look at this image and visualize it without that, I like it a lot better. And then, so by the same token, the guardrail does the same thing. But as I look, you know, in the lower right corner, and I can see what was there, and I understand what was going on with the waterfall, it's not really safe to climb over that thing at that time of year and try to get that shot. Just be aware of it. That's all, you know, is that there are distractions. You might have been able to eliminate a little bit more of the guardrail. I don't know. Sometimes moving up and down that area to eliminate the bush and leaning over a little more. I don't know. I wasn't there, so I can't say that for sure. I'm just saying that that's usually the best option, is just to move your feet a little bit and see if you can get, you know, but sometimes we're like, well, this is the best angle of the falls. And so I'm going to accept what comes along with it because I want, you know, to concentrate on the falls. And that's, you know, it's interesting. So it's why Niagara Falls are so fun to shoot, because there's no distractions. Like really, you can get right up to those things, and even shooting from across the gorge, you get, you know, the falls and pretty much nothing else. But the applause here is for going out on such a crappy day and getting this shot in the first place. I haven't seen that much ice in there in a long time, so I didn't realize it had been that cold. When was this?
Sunday
So yeah, I was going to say the
evening.
31st.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was pretty recent. Okay. All right. So tell me about this one. We have a couple things going on here that I think I recognize. This was again looking, well, you tell me, this was for motion, I'm assuming?
Yeah. So I was trying to like capture cars like driving like out my window in my house because it was raining and snowing yesterday. And it just so happened that a big semi truck came past like right at the perfect time. So I got a shot of that.
So a couple of the things that make this a little problematic for me are, again, we have that little tilt, not a lot, not a, you know, straight on, but just a little tilt, which is just enough to be a bit of a distraction. And then the other thing I think is the shutter speed is actually, it's a 400th of a second according to the metadata. And the truck's moving fast enough that even at that, it's going to blur a little bit. The problem is that it looks like I'm not sure if that's camera shake or misfocus, because as I look at the building in the background, it definitely appears to be sharper than the foreground. Where is this, Hannah?
This is in Warwood. This is
Okay, that's the
yeah.
gazebo in Garden Park.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
All right, so it took me a second, but I started looking, and the building in the background, I recognized that building. That's the water treatment near the fire department and all that. Okay, gotcha. But yeah, I think I can't imagine that it would have been focused on that and not the foreground, but it actually does look like that part of the image is sharper than the foreground. So let me ask you about, and if it's not in the metadata, let me look at your focus exposure. No, it's not recorded. Sometimes it'll tell me whether this is in autofocus or manual focus. And white balance is auto, exposure mode is auto, but it doesn't tell me about the focus. It almost looks like the autofocus was not on, and the lens was focused on infinity, or, you know, but again, I doubt that, because I'm struggling to figure out what happened here, because generally anything from about 30 feet beyond you is in the same plane of focus. So it would have been almost impossible, even if you had focused on the building intentionally, that truck would still have been in focus. So I'm guessing we've got camera movement more than anything else going on here. That's my guess. And you also have, some foreground distractions that kind of keep me. I mean, I recognize that you can't move your window, and if you got a
Yeah.
crappy day and you're going to go out and try to get a shot, you have what you have. But that lamp post down below, the telephone pole and the wires and all of that, if I envision it without that, I like it better. And then the tilt, I'd like to be either a lot more or none at all on this image. So for all of those reasons, I go back to your waterfall. I think that's cool. Anything about either one of these images that you want to share with us as far as challenges or something that you learned, or again, with the PDF files, anything in there that was an eye opener?
I guess the waterfall, the hardest part was that was like, it was the first time that I had taken my camera out and used it. And it was pouring down rain that day. So I was under an umbrella. So I really couldn't get very close. Plus the side of the road had snow and stuff all over it. So it wasn't really the safest conditions.
Yeah. And so the funny thing is, now you can assume those things as a viewer. You can look at it and say, that's probably the case, but it's not something that generally hits us, in our, when we first look at an image and go, oh, wow, they must have really had a problem with it. You just look at the image and you notice the distractions and not the other things. I'm not knocking what you did, because I recognize what you were dealing with there. So it's probably pretty amazing that you got, an image at all. But the point I was coming back to the point I was trying to make, one of the things that will make most photographs more visually interesting is to take them out and shoot on crappy days. And the reason is nobody does. Most people want a crappy day. They want to stay inside stay warm. But if you go out on a foggy day or a rainy day or misty or whatever, those are conditions that we see, but we don't photograph very often. So it definitely can make an image a lot. It makes it worthwhile sometimes when you go out under bad conditions and shoot. I know I've got ice photos like this from years ago, back when I was a little more adventurous than I am now. So now I appreciate them more, and I look at, I enjoy the beauty of it without having to go out and do it myself. I have a book here that was done by a friend of mine called Last Places on Earth. And he spent 2 years traveling the world and photographing dying cultures like Aboriginal tribes and things like that. And the conditions that he lived under for those 2 years were just horrendous in these third world countries. And I remember thanking him for being the one to go do that, so I didn't have to. It's nice. It's beautiful to look at those images. They're just incredible. And the stories behind them are even better. But I looked at it and thought, would I have done that? Hell no. No, I'm just happy on the couch with my remote. All right. So anyway, enough of that. I definitely think you're, if I haven't put it in there already, no. I think your waterfall is the better of the two images. Oh, hang on. Did I put it in there already? Oh, I did. It is there. Okay. So maybe I'll have to at least drive past there one of these days. All right, so let's move on. Jaden, you're up next. And I'm going to move backwards through your images. So this is the other snow image that I remembered. Tell me about, is this lit basically by the street lamps or lighting on the building, or was there some flash involved? How was this lit, the foreground?
I don't think I had any flash. It was just the light from the lamppost.
Okay, so let me look at your metadata. Oh yeah, so your ISO was at 6400, which is high enough to allow what's actually fairly dim light to record, and the shutter speed is 160th of a second. But again, the snow's moving fast enough to still blur out a little bit, particularly the pieces that are closer. Why is that? Why do you think? Anybody want to hazard a guess as to why the snowflakes that are closer to the camera are blurred more than the ones in the background? Go ahead,
Is it
Carla.
because the shutter speed's not fast enough to catch them as they're coming in close?
Nope. Good guess, but not exactly. If you think about, boy, if I say this word, it gives it away. But there is one word that describes why that happens.
Does it have to do with the depth of field?
I think I know what you're getting at, and if I'm right, then no. The answer is no, but it is related to that. It is sort of tied to it a little bit. Think about wow. There's two things that cause this to happen. One is very different, so I won't use that as an example. I'll tell you, I'll give it to you here in a second if nobody else comes up with it. And I can't see all of you, so just shout it out if you think you know it. So the word is distance. The snowflakes that are closer to the camera are actually, so think about the frame being like the frame of my camera that's showing me. Even if all the snowflakes are moving at the same speed, the ones that are closer actually travel further across that plane than the ones in the background do. They both fall exactly the same distance, but because the ones in the background are so much further away, they appear to only move this much, where the ones in the foreground may move that much. It's all about perspective. It's all about distance and things like that. Has anyone ever read, let me move this where I can see a few more of you. Oh, trying. There we go. Has anybody ever read the comic strip Calvin and Hobbes? Okay, a couple of you. So there's a really cool, if you remember, one of the things that Calvin's dad used to like to do to him is really mess with his mind. And so there's a cartoon where Calvin's sitting on the front porch and he's got a record player and he's watching a record. And his dad comes home and he says, "Oh," he said, "I noticed that you've got a record playing." He said, "Consider this." He said, "A speck of dust near the center of that record is traveling at 33 1/3 RPMs, which is the speed of an album." He said, "A speck of dust on the outside of the album is also traveling at 33 1/3 RPMs, but it's traveling much further than the inner one is." And he just walks away. And then the last frame is middle of the night and Calvin's laying in bed and his eyes are wide open because he's trying to figure this out. How could that be? How could they both be going 33 1/3 RPMs? Well, the answer to that is that the revolutions per minute do not directly relate to the distance traveled, but it's because of the fact that it's, that thing is out on the edge. It's like a planet in orbit, for example. The inner planets may move at the same speed or the same rate of rotation as an outer planet, but the outer planet just has a lot further to go. So there's a lot going on there. But so that's one thing. But the other thing, and the reason I bring it up at all, is imagine for a second that you've been asked to take pictures at a NASCAR race, which to me, by the way, NASCAR is 3.5 hours of a left-hand turn. Like there's, other than the occasional wreck, there's nothing worthwhile about watching NASCAR. One of my favorite t-shirts says, "Too dumb for opera, too smart for NASCAR." That's I sort of fall in that area myself. But if you've been asked to take pictures at a NASCAR race, you're going to get some pictures of blurry cars, right? Because they're moving really, really fast. And unless your camera's on a tripod and you're using an incredibly fast shutter speed, those cars are probably going to blur. But let's say you're sitting in the grandstands right on what would be like the 50-yard line or right on the finish line. and you're photographing those cars as they zoom past in front of you, and you're really having a hard time getting anything sharp on those cars because they're just moving so fast. What do you think you might be able to do with the same camera settings, the same shutter speed? Is there anything you can do that would make those cars sharper than what they are? And this is a really tricky question, but it does force you to think a little bit about what we've been talking about distance traveled.
Could you possibly move your camera with the cars a little bit and then like rapid fire the
So
pictures,
yeah,
whatever it is?
that is the technique is called panning, and that's definitely what a lot of really good photographers do if they're good at it. What happens is you keep the car sharper and then the background blurs. So you really get that sense of motion when you look at something like that. But without doing that, if you were just either let's say you're hand holding the camera and you just want to get a sharper picture of one of these cars, there is a way to do it. Even let's say at 1,000th of a second, the cars are still blurred as they cross in front of you. There is a way to do that at the same shutter speed. See a couple of you thinking.
Would it have to do with perspective, like to change the angle?
There you go. That's it right there. So remember, I talked about sitting, looking at the finish line, and these cars are zooming in front of you. What if you went down to the edge and or even stayed up high, but moved around to where the cars are now coming towards you instead of crossing in front of you? They're actually moving less distance in your frame at the same speed than they are as they're zooming in front of you this way. So you're absolutely right. That's what you would do. Change your angle, move your feet, keep your shutter speed the same, and that car is going to be a lot sharper. And it's all because of perspective and the angle. More, that's probably a better word, is the angle. So great answer. You nailed that. Okay, so anyway, yeah, we've got movement in the camera. We've got more visually interesting images as I go up here. So this one says Motion Mars.
Yeah, that's his name.
Oh, okay. So, is that his last name? His first name's not Bruno, is it? Is it Mars because he's red?
Yeah, that's what the pet store named him.
Oh, really? So you just kept it so he wouldn't get confused.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So this is, I don't have metadata on your files for whatever reason. I'm not sure. Sometimes they get stripped away. But it says Motion Mars, and he's definitely, obviously in motion, but yet we're not seeing a lot of motion. He's kind of a little more frozen. Is that intentional, or is it
Yeah,
just the way it works?
I was trying to catch him like when he was turning, but he wasn't turning the right way because he's not very camera
aware, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just like shoot, it's just like whose brother was it on the swing? They don't cooperate. They don't want to do what we want them to do. But still, you got this little ball of a fish, which these fish are pretty cool. I'm assuming this is the same fish here.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So this is the one that immediately caught my eye as having incredibly good color contrast. So in addition to having a blurred background, which really, will make your subject stand out, you have great color contrast, red and greens being opposite colors on the color wheel. That's what makes something pop out. And typically red is better as the foreground color than the background as far as making something stand out. So a couple of things that were done really well here. That one, the background being blurred as it was, the fish being as sharp as it is, and the color contrast. There's one other thing that I particularly like. Anybody want to take a guess?
Well, I don't know, but I like how it's purple. Is the different colors within the red. I think it's really cool.
True. And it's still in the same color family, so it doesn't break the contrast thing. But Mars was kind enough to pose in a position that creates a diagonal out of himself. So he's not straight across in the frame. And he's, and it's very weird, but it creates a very different mood if he's going up as opposed to going down. The fact that he's going up, so again, our brain takes over. Oh, he's feeding him. He's going up to get, some food, or pointed up is is a connotation of being happier, whereas going down is like, oh God, he's sinking, blow the ballasts or whatever. But the fact that he's on a diagonal like that really helps, create that effect. And then the parts of his fins that are, the lines in the fins, they actually create leading lines that lead into his body, and they're on that diagonal as well. So all three of the images satisfy. This one, though, is the one I think that visually, it was, as soon as I saw it, I was like, wow, like that's a great shot. I really appreciate that one. This one I know was a bit of a challenge, and I know what you were going for here, but visually, if I'm going to make one very, very slight suggestion, critique, whatever, is looking at the placement. It's so close, but I would have cropped a little bit off of the right, just a little bit, maybe the bottom right as well, just to really put him in. There's a little bit more space in front of him than behind him. I might have given him a little bit less to create some tension, as his not put his nose right up against it, but just so that the area in front of him matched the area behind him a little bit closer. But it is really slight, really tiny, and it's so slight that I hesitate to even mention it. But that's the only thing I see. This is otherwise a really good shot. So good job.
Thank you.
All right, Caleb also has one here. Both of them done well. One of them I love. Let's start with so this is funny because the f-stop on this, the aperture on this is f8, which you would normally think, wow, that should give you a lot of depth of field, right? It's a more of a smaller aperture, but yet the tail of this plane, the propeller, the far wing, they're all out of focus. Why is that?
There's no real, wait, can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, yeah, there was no real reason behind that. I just wanted to get more of the plane just in focus.
There is a technical reason why it happened, though. Do you know why? Let me tell you this. It would have been almost impossible if you had said, I want this whole plane to be in focus. It would have been almost impossible, no matter what your f-stop was. And the answer to that question, the reason, there you go. It's distance again. It's the fact that you were physically very close to that plane, right? Like not that close, obviously, but you were in pretty tight, right? So at that distance, if you think about, we talked about the ratio between camera, subject, and background. Well, in this case, there's a ratio between camera, cockpit, and far wing. That far wing is almost probably as far away from the cockpit as the camera is from the cockpit. So it's really, really difficult in a small miniature like this to get the entire thing in focus. About the only way to do it is to shoot with so much light that your f-stop is a ridiculous, like f64 or something like that, and to use a longer lens from a little further back because it does tend to compress distance. This isn't a bad thing, by the way. I kind of like that. I like the fact that you focused on what it is that we want to see on that plane. The rest of it, we don't need that kind of detail. We see what it is. We know what it is, but it forces us to look at the fuselage and the cockpit area. And so I really like that. This one, though, for motion, I love this. This was a great idea to pluck these strings and to get them moving. And the weird thing is, again, your f-stop on this is f22, which is really stopped down, really creating a lot of depth of field. And because your ISO is so high, your shutter speed is a 500th of a second, but yet still there's enough vibration in these strings for them to show us motion. You could have done a couple of different combinations of f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO here and had slightly different results. But as soon as I looked at this, and saw the vibration in the strings, I'm like, great idea. Like that was absolutely genius as far as coming up with something motion. This is not something I would have thought of, which I should have if you look at the wall behind me, but I didn't. And so this was a great idea of that. It's off a wee little bit. Like again, if I look at the bridge at the bottom, it rises a little bit from left to right. I would have maybe cropped it down a little bit to straighten that up some, but man, totally a minor thing. Overall, this was really cool. And this is, what is this, by the way? It's a 4-string. It's not a bass.
It's a ukulele.
Ukulele. Okay, that makes a little more sense with the wood grain top. And so it's a very small again as well. So the reason that F22 isn't giving you sharpness from foreground to background, because you're in pretty tight on it. Gotcha. Anyway, love this image. I had probably 4 or 5 that I would say were my favorites this week. That was definitely one of them. Anything you want to tell us about either of them as far as challenges or thought process?
There was a lot of pictures for the ukulele.
You took a lot of pictures to get them. Well, good. I mean, I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad that you guys don't go out and just snap the first thing and go, all right, done, send it off, because it's the failures that teach you more than the successes do. So I really appreciate that. Great job on that. Liz, so we've got, again, was this, I'm guessing probably a cell phone?
Yeah, that was on my cell phone.
Okay, and this is obviously not recent because it
No.
looks a little nicer. I don't think either one of them are recent, but
No.
but so this one was for the blurred background, an isolated subject against the blurred background. Which did you add some blur to that?
No, I didn't. I actually took it like that. This picture was actually an accident. I meant to send it in a different one, but then I seen it and I was like, oh, okay, well, that works.
So the reason I ask that is if you look at, can you see the loop that I've got over this that's magnifying
Yeah.
it? Look at the water to the left of that branch and then the water to the right of the branch. They don't match. Like there's the water to the right of the branch is sharper than the water to the left. That's the first thing I saw. And
Yeah.
that's why I wondered if maybe you had added a blur to that at some point, maybe back when you did this.
No, I actually took this in portrait mode on my cell phone.
Okay, interesting. That's cool that it did that. I'm kind of curious. I'd love to know why that happened. It's kind of
Yeah,
usually,
now that you pointed that out, I realized it.
yeah, it's usually a telltale sign of somebody adding blur, because if you miss something, it'll stand out like that. Again, I like the diagonal that you've created, not just with the plant, but the opposite diagonal that's created with a shoreline in the back. It was clearly done intentionally, not a little bit off. So I like that. And even though I did comment last week, I think, about horizon lines and water, not tilting them so that it looks like the water is running out. If you do it enough, if you have enough of an angle to make it look like it was intentional, and the reason is that you're creating these diagonals, then it's a little more palatable. Like we can live with that. This one, so it's funny. I had never been to Point State Park until recently, and first of all, I was amazed. Well, I didn't realize how accessible it is. I always thought that you had to park in town somewhere and walk forever to get there, and it was a nightmare. And so I never went there, and I had to go there in September and October to shoot, and realized, well, there's a parking lot right here, and it's pretty accessible unless you do what I did, which I'll tell you about in a second. But anyway, I'm going to move this so we can. I don't know if you guys are seeing that part of it, like your images as I move them around or not, but I want to make sure that you can see the image. So again, great sunset. We have motion in the water. Your aperture and shutter speed aren't recorded because it's a cell phone, but
Yeah.
sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But I can definitely see that the shutter speed is slow enough to allow some motion in that water, and I like that. So I did shots here both ways, both freezing that and both blurring it, and they both have their place. They both, work well for different reasons. Um, it's obviously fast enough that the water that's in the surrounding area and on the river is pretty still, but the it's being shot out of that fountain so quickly that there's a lot of motion there. I like the composition that you did. I probably I don't think there's a way to combat this. I'm looking at the angle of the fountain thinking, oh, I'd probably want to straighten that a little bit. But then if you look at it, that would completely blow the horizon line. And it's definitely better to have the horizon line horizontal here than it is the fountain. So no criticism there. That works pretty well.
Thank you.
I don't know if I have. Let me just quickly look and see if I have access to what I was telling you about. I have to wake a drive up. There we go. No, I don't. Thought I did. What? Maybe I do. Maybe I do. Yeah, so I got lucky when I went there. The day we went there, this rainbow was actually naturally occurring, like from that angle, because of the angle of the sun and the water and everything. Not my favorite image, but I'm just looking for some more, again, motion in that background. But there's one, yeah, there it is. That's the one I was looking at or looking for. This again creates some contrast, and you can almost like feel the force of that water, which is pretty cool. I didn't get the shot that I really wanted with that fountain. We had to go back twice, and like I said, the hard part is not getting to the point. The hard part is transporting somebody like this in a wheelchair, because you can't walk in a silicone mermaid tail. So we had to, put her in a wheelchair and wheel her down there. And it's not flat, like especially going back up to the parking lot. It's I got a workout, let me tell you. Pushing that tail weighs about 30 pounds, and pushing all the gear, all the tripods, the lights that we had, the camera, that was all resting on the top of the wheelchair. So I'm pushing all of that weight in and out. It was really, this is actually over by the edge, right at the river's edge. But there were a couple of cool things with that fountain, and I'm just looking, like just using a little bit of the water. Again, being there on a day where the sun or the sky rather was so blue was a big plus. Yeah, I don't really have the image in here that I'm looking for, but I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of how much fun it is to push 30 pounds of tail and 50 pounds of gear in and out of that place. So I give you credit for getting down there and doing this. And so even though these are pre-existing images, they still satisfy the requirement. I think I would have preferred you to go out and shoot something new, because that would have forced you to probably to fail a little bit and have to overcome some obstacles. But still, the images are good and they do satisfy the requirement. I think for me, I don't know what you think, but I definitely like your fountain shot better. Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really pretty shot. All right, we are going to go let's do one more here. Max, we'll get you in, and then
Professor Campbell, my pictures weren't taken recently either.
Okay.
So, but I really liked them, so I hope you all can bear
Well,
with
this
me.
one was obvious. It was not taken this week.
Yeah.
Unless, you belong to the Polar Bear Club or something. That was pretty obvious. But even still, you look back and found something that definitely satisfied the requirement. And I didn't specify when we set this up that it had to be. So I'm not knocking anybody for doing that. So
I'm not really a huge fan of winter photography, if you want the truth, but I definitely will go out and try to take some more pictures for some future assignments. So
I do encourage it. I mean, I can tell you that as much as I hate it, as much as I hate going out in the cold, whenever I have, I've come away with some really, actually, I'm going to go back for a second to, I don't know where they are. I'll find them after the break and show them to you. But I was talked into going out 2 years ago to the park to do some shots, and it was, I want to say the air temperature was like the low single digits, like 2, 3, 4 degrees, and it was windy. So you can imagine what the wind chill was like. And we literally would have to drive to a spot, get out of the van, run to where we wanted to shoot, take a few shots, and run back to the van, which was still running, because our toes were like, they felt like they were frostbit. And I hate it, but I love the images that came from that, because it's just, they're very unique. So I used to have a cat that looked like this, for example. But I like first of all, I like the fact that you've got a very sharp subject with a very blurred background. We've got a couple of other things going on. We've got a neutral color subject with a complementary color background. Excuse me, with the blue. The concrete, even though it's gray as well, contrasts with a cat because it's lighter and he's darker. But mostly, I applaud you for getting a picture of a cat sitting this still, because they are probably way harder to photograph than dogs are.
yeah, he was super relaxed. He likes the sun outside, and that was right as the sun was setting. So he was kind of just rolling around on the concrete and doing cat things. So it was a good time to take a photo.
So, and I'll tell anybody that wants to shoot cats or any pet for that matter, it's all about the eyes. Make sure that you've got good light in those eyes. And if you look at his eye, is it a he?
Yeah, it's a he. Yeah.
If you look at his eyes, you can actually see the catch lights in his eyes from the reflected sky, which is lighting him. So that's really important for pet pictures. And then this one, same idea. These were both aperture shots. Let me scroll up to this. If I were going to, there is one suggestion I might make to you here.
Wait, can I say it first?
Go ahead.
Is it that I should have turned the bottle a little bit so you couldn't see that bottom like sticker label?
That's
thing
the
on it?
second suggestion.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely should have done that. I wasn't thinking.
Yeah, it's just it's the barcode to the right of the label, and then the other label to the bottom. It would have definitely been less distraction. But there's one other distraction. Not so much a distraction as it is. This is a compositional thing.
Is it the house in
So
the background?
Think about if the bottle was on the right side of the image instead of the left side of the image. Now,
those two things bothered me too, for sure.
Yeah, it's going to set it apart a little bit more because there's nothing that's very distinct back there. And also compositionally, again, we read from left to right. So we want to come in from a photograph from the left-hand side, but when we get to that Coke bottle, it's like, bam, we just slam into it, you know? If it were all the way on the right-hand side, it would let us get all the way over to that and enjoy everything that's in the meantime to get over there. But still, I like the image. I like the concept and the idea. I think I like your cat better just because it's a cute cat.
Yeah.
Be very careful though. You're really right on the edge here with cropping that we lost one of the paws. You're better off to really crop either in on the torso and the face or to get the whole body, but just a little bit of a piece off. And it's the same thing with people. Like you would never want to crop at a joint, like a wrist or an elbow or a knee.
I didn't crop this. This was the original photo.
Right. And so I mean, it's just like, just a half inch, over with the camera to get him all in. And, but believe me, I understand the challenges of, oh my God, this cat's posing. I got to get the shot. And you got it. It's just, if I'm going to teach you guys anything, I'm going to have to nitpick because especially when you have images that are pretty good, I really have to nitpick to come up with stuff. But if I do, you'll think of those things on your own when you go down, to shoot them again the next time. But I like both of those.
Thank you.
So these are for shutter speed. And if I look here, we've got, it's only a 250th of a second, but we don't have a NASCAR race either. We have a centipede, which is moving a little bit slower. So he's definitely a little more frozen there. Whereas this one is showing us a little bit more motion with the waves crashing on the rocks. And let me move this again.
Something really quick is with the millipede, if you zoom in on his head, there's a little droplet of water.
Oh yeah, I see it.
I just thought that was cool.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. And then, so there's nothing else in that image. There's nothing, earth shattering about it, good or bad. It just is what it is. Again, so if you had shot facing him, and I'm not suggesting you do this, I'm actually like the way you did it better. But if you had shot facing him with his head closer to the camera, his tail would have been completely out of focus. Whereas, coming across like this, we get a better look at him. And this, where is this?
That's in Aruba off of, there's a land bridge in Aruba that's like right next to that. And that's where I took that photo at. Yeah.
There, how long ago were you there?
That was last November.
Okay.
The November before last. I don't remember.
They may have reconstructed that then, because when I was there, that bridge had collapsed.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
but I think one of them you weren't allowed to walk on because it was at risk of collapsing. And then one of them you were allowed to walk on or something like that.
And I may not have seen this one, but yeah, I've been to that area. This isn't far from where like all the rocks are stacked up, where people stack the rocks. Yeah. It's a pretty cool spot. Pretty neat looking things. So yeah, one of my favorite places to go. I'll be honest with you though, for those of you looking to travel, it's a long way to go for what it is. That's my opinion. It's a long trip, and it's a very expensive place for like this part of the island. I love what they call the unexplored. It's not really unexplored. It's just sort of untamed, like they haven't developed it. The other part of the island, to me, I get a little upset, like, wow, there's this really cool little eclectic shop, and next to it, there's a Caesar's Pizza, Little Caesar's Pizza. It's like, it's kind of weird the way that works. But this side of the island, I really like. If you really want something interesting that's a lot closer and a lot less expensive, but still affords incredible views, go to Bermuda. Bermuda is only like 800 miles off the coast of Georgia. It's a couple $100 for a plane ticket. Some of the things there can be expensive, like hotels and so forth, but transportation is cheap. Like I took a ferry and a cab one day to go all the way around the island, and I think it cost, for two people, it cost $8. It was pretty amazing. But yeah, both these places are very picturesque and very.
Real quick question: when you were in Aruba, did you happen to have a Balashi?
No, what is that?
It's this beer they make on the island, and they make it out of like something with the water, and like it's a different alcohol percentage than regular beer. And I mean, I was 18 when I was there, and it was actually pretty good. So if you ever go to Aruba again, definitely try a Balashi.
Well, I know why I didn't have it. I'm not a beer drinker. I'm not a fan of beer, but
Me either, but I had to try it.
So I'll tell you, if you go to Bermuda, have a rum swizzle. So there's two drinks there that are considered the official drink of Bermuda. One is a rum swizzle, which, by the way, tastes really good, and they will kick your ass. So be careful. Like if you drink an iced tea type size drink of that, you won't feel anything until you get up, and then it'll be like you're in next week. Like it'll just. The other one's called a dark and stormy, which is a little more of a dark, very flavorful drink. I like the rum swizzles better, but the dark and stormy is what they consider their main drink. So I don't know what you think about your images.
You're going towards the cat, aren't you?
I really am.
You are.
I really am.
Go for it then. Go for
it. I just think that degree of difficulty alone, I'm going to give you that.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback, by the way. You have good critiquing.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
I tell you what we're going to do, guys. Let's power through. We got 4 more. Let's power through these. Then we'll take a quick break before we come back and do the rest. We've got about hour and 15 minutes. I think we can get through these. I don't want to gloss over. I don't want to shortchange anybody, but I think we can do this. So this is Ross up next. Again, I don't have metadata on these. I'm assuming probably cell phone shots, but both of them not only satisfy the requirement for the assignment. I like your title on this one. This is called Distractions. So, I mean, again, if we're going to talk about stories, here's a laptop in the back. Clearly he's trying to do homework, and yet this controller keeps placing itself in front of him. I know that feeling. I know how hard it is to get work done when you want to play. So I love the title, which, by the way, let me make a comment, guys. If you really want to tell stories with your images, put titles on them. Come up with something that helps the viewer understand what comment it is that you're trying to make. This one was great along those lines. Not only a good execution of the idea, but a good title on it. Anything you want to tell us about that one, Ross?
I'd say the hardest part about taking this was just the lighting, given that it was a little bit later in the day and then the light was shining right in the window. So I had to play with that, and this is ultimately the one I chose.
And so backlighting, by the way, is very dramatic lighting generally. So even though you may have struggled with getting it right, I think you did. And I think it was worth it because flat lighting from the camera position does not generally make an interesting shot. In fact, the general rule of thumb, this isn't always true, but the general rule of thumb is that the further your light source gets away from your camera, the more dramatic the image is going to be. So think about it in a 360-degree arc. If your camera's here and your subject is 180 degrees away, the further that light source gets, your main light source gets away from your camera, and that's as far as you can get it, is 180 degrees, which is backlighting, that the more dramatic the images will be. So I think the backlighting was good on this one. I think that's what it called for, without doing a very complex lighting setup. This one, titled Rain, was for motion, I'm guessing, because of the water droplets. And again, with limited resources to work with, this was a cell phone, I'm guessing?
No, that was actually my camera. So
Oh, okay.
it's something I didn't do. I can fix it for next week.
Yeah, it's just when they come in without the metadata, I assume sometimes it is a cell phone, but first of all, I love the texture in this image. I love the monochromatic feel that it has. I think it makes it all visually interesting. That lone leaf, the fact that we don't see anything but that leaf, that really adds a lot of drama and interest. The only thing I would have done differently would have been maybe to crop this from the bottom so that leaf, and maybe a little bit from the left as well, so that leaf would have been on more of an impact point, which again, I know we haven't gotten into composition yet, but if you look at the water from, a little bit below the leaf down, there's nothing going on there. There's really no raindrops going on. The drama is all in the upper part of the image. So you probably could have lost a little bit along the bottom and a little bit off the left and made it a little more dramatic, a little stronger. But overall, the color harmony in this image, this would be like graphic minimalization, was done really well. So I really do like both of your images for different reasons. I'm going to let you pick, but yeah, I really do like both for different reasons.
Probably the distractions. That one took me a minute.
Yeah, and even though you have a different reason for liking it, I just think the title and the execution of it was pretty flawless. I really enjoyed that. Anything else?
Actually, I did. As far as the controller, I originally didn't have that in the picture. I wanted to have the window and just like focus in on the outside and then have everything else blurry, but it didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. So I ended up putting the phone in there, and then the reflection just didn't work. So then I resorted to the controller.
Well, again, I like the thought process of trying something, recognizing that it's not quite what you want, and then moving on and finally getting there. I mean, that's just the way it works. When you're photographing something for hire, if you've been, hired to photograph an object, for example, You're never going to do just one shot. You know, it's going to be, let's try this, let's try that, let's move this and move that, because the client ultimately will tend to choose something that they didn't tell you they wanted. If you can, you know, show them multiple versions of it. So it's always a good idea. So I appreciate that. All right, Samantha. So we have a couple of interesting shots here. This one,
Yes, very interesting.
let me look down through here. So this is, again, these are iPhone shots again. But again, you've got that, without realizing probably that you did it, you have that 3-point thing going on here where the camera is very close to the subject and then the background is a little further away. So that's what creates the blurred background, is that distance and that ratio. I also always appreciate a little bit of humor, and this dude looks like he partied a little too hard. So I kind of like that. Tell me about the other items that are in the picture, though, that are behind him on the table there, or whatever. What are they and why are they there?
So this was in my apartment on a table, and the skull, his name is Candace.
His name, wait a minute, his name is Candace?
Yes, or it's a her, I don't remember. It's kind of funny, but it's like, we joke that it's like a god because like the clock fell off the wall one time and all the time. But anywho, so, and we have these party hats because we were having parties throughout the last 2 semesters, you know, for birthdays and such. So, and it
Or
fits perfectly, so I
Tuesdays
put
or
it on his head.
Thursdays, or, yeah, whatever the reason is. It might
Yeah,
be
you
just
know,
a Tuesday.
whatever works. And you know, it's a plastic skull, so it kind of needed some help standing. So I put him in the bowl recently, actually, with in the art class. And then there is also
Hang on one second. Everything's
to focus on the pot with the lid, so I put it behind it. And then that light was there, which I don't know. Candace just gives me creepy vibes, so it's kind of like a like a, you know, a magic ball. It just lights up. And then I didn't want to focus on the background as much because it's a couch. It's just there. But,
yeah, if I'm going to make a suggestion at all, I just would remove the items on the couch. Again, envision it without those
Yeah.
things there, and it's a much stronger image. The 3 items on the table create a diagonal, so those are visually interesting, but what's in the background, you know, not so much. I probably just would have pulled
And
those off.
if I had more control, like once I explore the camera I'm getting, I would try to make it like completely blurred out. You know, not, you can't tell what's in the background.
Yeah, like I said,
That's what I was trying to do, but you know, iPhones.
yeah, right.
And,
Exactly. You have
Yeah.
much very limited resources when you're doing that.
yeah, but I got inspired. So
Well, good.
meet Candace.
So I'm guessing we employed possibly a roommate to work the
Yes.
rest of these images. So let me look here. Again, the metadata isn't really as important here because the phone is really going to pick all of that for you. So we're not going to
Yeah.
comment on it too much. But your roommate becomes the subject here, obviously, because she's lit.
Well,
And
It's
Go ahead.
interesting because it started out her just being back there, but then we had fun. So this was one of the fun ones because if you actually look at her, she looks evil. Like her face, the way it's lit, and
yeah, well,
so
the
like you said,
eyes.
in the way the light lights her up, but not Candace, the skull. It was really fun. So I appreciated it.
My question is, so you said she was just sort of back there. My question is, if your roommate stands around dressed like that with lights hanging on her,
No.
but yet Candace freaks you out?
No. She was for the purpose. She was supposed to be there. Yeah,
Okay.
this is not normal.
I just wanted to clarify that she doesn't normally just hang around
She was
like
supposed
this.
to be.
Okay.
It was supposed to be like a luring type situation. You know, you focus on Candace, but then there's this craziness going in the background.
Gotcha. And again, you're right, with a camera that would give you more control, and with putting, maybe I would have taken a desk lamp or something and lit Candace in the foreground. And that would have, and then created more blur with the subject in the background. That would have really enhanced it even more. But again, I'll give you credit for the thought process. Just watch your distractions. I'm looking as I look at all four corners. I see a lot of things. I see this door handle. I see this strap of something, a bag and a rug, the cord, all of those little things are easily controlled in a situation like that. So just be aware of that as you go forward. So now we've got some motion here. And even though, the shutter speed, again, you can't control, but it is very slow, 1/17 of a second. And in lower lighting, you're going to be able to get a little more motion here. Nothing really negative to say about this. I mean, it would be great. A shot like this is great if like the arms and the material that she's holding are in motion, but the subject herself is a little sharper. But again, I understand the problems with doing that. You probably could have shot all night and never gotten that.
Yeah. Like we were going at it, and just the way, even though we didn't mean to do this, but even after, when we looked at it, we're like, well, it's kind of, everything's vibrating. So that was pretty cool. Like it's all in motion.
Mm-hmm. And very, very few distractions in that, even though the door frame is a little bit, you can use it as a framing device. Now we have the distractions back though, because we can see what's going on back in there. But again, I'm looking at what you did instead of what you didn't do. So we still have motion in the fabric because she's kind of swinging that around, the juxtaposition of the skull with just the one eye. So a lot of cool things done there. I think just as you move forward and refine all of the things that you don't want in there and concentrate on the ones you do, your mind works really well that way as far as what you're concentrating on. But you just have to look beyond your subjects and control that a little bit better. But overall, I liked what you did with most of these. I think these two, again, for different reasons, are what I would look at as the better. I mean, I love the expression she has in the one on the right, but I think the distractions really keep me from enjoying that more than I want to. So I probably would go back to the Candace by herself. Just me.
I would too. I mean, the other ones have character, but like you said, the distractions take away.
Yeah, and even though this has a few, the foreground is so strong that it overcomes them a little bit anyway. So good job. I really, really like seeing you guys, the thought process behind what you're doing and how you work through these. So good job on all of that. And we're moving to Sammy. Oh, by the way, I'm going to start from the bottom up here again. So we've got a couple of images that show the blurry background. Interesting choices as far as subject matter. Tell me about that.
So to be honest with you, I went outside and tried to take some pictures, and I really just could not find anything interesting. And then I was just kind of walking around the house, and like I noticed this, where like my backpack and the computer screen and my tree kind of all matched the same color, and I thought it kind of looked a bit interesting and like pleasing to the eye.
So a little bit of repetition in the colors. Yeah, okay, I get that. And then this one, again, very kind of a mundane subject, but yet done in a way that's really close to being really interesting. I think I'm going to open this one up actually and just do this really quickly. And I'll have to share that screen with you. Hang on. I think this one could become way, way, way stronger by doing one very simple thing, and that's cropping it down. In fact, well, no, I would leave it right like that because the diagonals are already there with the flowers in the background. I love that, even though your subject now is pretty much a vertical. But I like the lighting that's hitting, almost like kicker lights on either side that are lighting the edges up. And then that background, even though we can tell what it is, it's very much out of focus. The only other thing maybe, I'd probably pull it up to remove the red as well.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have a much, much stronger image overall than if we go back and look at that. It just kind of gets lost in there. Like as soon as I saw it,
Yeah.
I'm like, there's an image there. But I'm not quite getting to it because of all the distractions around. But yeah, this was a simple one. Crop it down and you got it. Let me get out of that. All right, so let me go back to Bridge. So both of those are interesting. I think that one cropped down is way more interesting, but the ones that I loved were these. So this was a 4-second exposure, if I'm reading that right, correct?
Yeah,
And so did you move the camera or did you move the subject?
I moved the camera.
Yeah, and that's the easier way to do that. And then this one is also, I like this one better because we really see what it is that you started with. We understand, sort of what that piece is, but the color
Yeah.
and the saturation, very strong. The fact that it's isolated against black makes it even stronger. We can read it, we can kind of tell, but yet it's got this really creative vibe to it. This to me was again one of the top images of the week. I really like this one a lot. This one was pretty good. I like the fact that it's almost a bit of a diagonal, but structurally and compositionally, this one is way, way, way stronger. I hope you agree.
Yeah, I agree actually, because that first one that's like diagonal was almost kind of basically like a first draft as such. And then that second one, this took me basically about an hour because I was just messing around with stuff. And then that first one was just the sign itself. And I was like, okay, it's not very like visually interesting. Like it is, but it isn't. This image right here is actually, this sign was in front, right? And it was flipped like this way.
Oh, okay.
And then the one in like the very back is actually the reflection off of a mirror.
Oh,
And
okay.
then in the very back where the O should be, that is actually my phone camera reflecting.
Oh, so a lot of mysteries cleared up here. Really cool. I love the mirror idea. I think that was really kind of cool. That was a great idea to do that. Again, the color on this is so strong. The composition is so strong. There are no distractions here at all. I mean, this one's just really well done. That's, again, one of my top 4 or 5 favorites of the week. So really well done. I love the fact that you did spend a lot of time on it. And I know you might think to yourself, or somebody might say, my God, why did you spend an hour on that picture? What are you going to do with that picture? Well, maybe nothing. But what it did was it taught you some things so that as you continue to do things down the road, you've already got that knowledge and that base. So you won't spend an hour the next time you go to do something like this.
Yeah.
So great job. That, again, one of my favorites. All right. So Sierra has 2 shots, one with motion, one with the background blurred. So this one is a good idea. I really like the concept that you had here of fanning the pages of this book. My only issue is that it's a 1/2 second exposure, which it needed to be, I think, to get any motion in there. But the problem is that I'm guessing this is handheld. And so I'm seeing that even the things that are stationary aren't as sharp as they should be. So I kind of give you 50-50 on this one. I really like the concept, the idea, and even the composition. I think you did really well. And the lighting kind of works with it and all of that. I would just like to have seen the camera stationary enough to really freeze everything that we didn't want to freeze. So I'm guessing that was camera movement because it is a 1/2 second exposure.
Yeah, because the tripod I was using, it's not the one I usually use. It's like one of the bendy ones, so it wouldn't stand still. So I had to hold it while it was still on the tripod.
Yeah, and a 1/2 second is it's gonna cause motion with something like that. So it's just understandable. But again, lesson learned as you've done this, right? So
Yeah.
next time will be better. Now this one I like a lot. Even though your f-stop, and this is what we were talking about, like with the image of the plane and some others, even though your f-stop on this is f22, which would normally give you a lot of depth of field, a lot of focus front to back, the distance between the camera and these dice is so shallow, and the ratio between the dice and the background is what creates that. I love where you focused it. The point of focus was really good. The base that they're on, the table or whatever, creates these lines that lead from foreground to background. And then again, the color of the dice really steps out and kind of makes them stand out. There's separation between the dice and the hand in the background. There's just a lot of things that you did really well here. I think this is by far the better of the two images. Anything that you can add to that?
Well, I was actually going to use this one for, like, I was trying to get this one for a motion picture, like someone dropping the dice, but it turned out that I like this one better for like the blur background.
So are we seeing a pattern here, guys, where we have one idea and you start working on it and then suddenly it morphs into a different idea? Sometimes it's because of a challenge and sometimes you just have a better idea, and that's great. That as long as that thought process is there, I think that's the reason why you guys are already creating some things that are visually interesting. So great job with that. We're gonna yeah, let's do this now. Let's really quickly vote on our favorites. Let me pull this down. And let's see, I can see everybody, but two of you will do, well, you can still use your thumb for the vote if you want to do that. So let's start from the upper left and go with Candace first. And again, remember, you can vote for your own image, but you can only vote once. Mars, the little fish. Oh, hang on. Keep the hands up for me, guys. Okay. Distractions. Okay. The shopping cart. Gotcha. Point State Park. Okay. Waterfall. Hannah, you might want to put your thumb, there you go. The dice.
I don't have a camera, but I choose that one.
Which one?
The dice.
The dice, okay,
Yes,
gotcha. Guitar strings. The Love Shack. Okay, the cat. What's your cat's name, by the way?
His name's Shadow, and he actually passed away about a year ago. So he was a little tubby, so it figures.
And then finally, our backlit snow. All right, so our winner by show of hands with like, this is like the biggest landslide that we've had so far is Mars, the red fish. So as not always, I'm not always going to do this, but this time I really do have to give some honorable mentions out. Oh, and this is tough because so many of these are really good. Wow. I easily I could do 5 more, maybe even 6, but I'm going to bring it down. I'm going to give 2. I'm doing the guitar strings and the love sign because I just think that for the assignment that we had, those were both very creative ways to do them, and they were both very graphically interesting. So all 3 of those get a point. And so it is 5:38. Let's yeah, we got to get some new material in here. Let's call it let's say 5:50. We come back and we'll do all of the new stuff we need and get the assignment for next week and head on out. So we got about 11 minutes here. All right, let me get back to Zoom and I'll stop sharing. All right, cool.
Daddy says it's like $500 and like sticks to the auto body part, and then you just spray it and do it. So it's fine, but you know, those. Yeah. I know, maybe scrape it and then drive it back. Oh, like I did just recently. Yeah. I never noticed before. So that's why I thought it was this way around and around. Huh. Yeah, that's weird. Could be the dynamic of the clothes. I mean, these like jeans are those. These are still wet. Because these jeans are not wet. They are cold, but that's probably because I left my laundry down there all day. Oops. Not oops. I've been oh yeah. That's so funny. I mean, what was I gonna do? Come back from class to get my laundry? Wait till tonight to do it? They wouldn't have gotten done, Sam. You know me. Yes, I do know you. Which ones are still wet? Lay them on my door and set up my feet in the perfect position and have to go back and forth on them. Like it's just you and the clothes. I call my mom to brag about this. What'd she say? I think it's cool. I think it's cool too. It's not very big. You said it was a problem. I'm like, yeah, now my room's the warmest room in the apartment. We're all hot. Yeah. Hot. I get to the library, I sit down to my class, I pull out my iPad, and guess what's not on the back of my iPad? My pencil. What are you doing? I know, apparently it was hidden in one of my blankets. So I just sat there and I drew with my, I turned off Palmer Jackson and drew with my hand. Oh, not my notes, we didn't go with notes, but like assignments that are due this next week and we're looking for a sheet down. You don't need to see green if she goes hot. Ah! Get fucked, Sean! What? Pretty sure Shigo was my first, like, girl crush, right? Like 90%.
When you forget to mute your mic.
But back then I didn't know what that meant. I was just like, ah yes, I just really like Shigo. Don't know why. Yeah. I just like Shigo. Yeah. And then, you know, later me she realized I'm funny. Oh. That made me realize I didn't like girls. I was like girls. It was burlesque, but it's almost then. You ever seen that movie? No. How has no one in this household seen burlesque but Hannah? Because Hannah, I don't know what kind of movie it is, so you tell me what the genre is or whether it's animated or it's not animated, let me tell you. You know what burlesque is? No. Obviously not. If I'm asking you what kind of movie it is. I suggest we have a movie date, not, you know, like in the future and watch. Oh, but I don't want you to. Oh, I'll pay 50 cents for you. He only charged me for 10 pages. He's like, because it was easier to give me 50 cents back than to try and give me 45 cents back. It is not appropriate for all audiences, let me tell you. I watched this one. I get drag queen vibes. But it's all women.
that I have seen this movie. They showed it to us at school. Yeah, no, high school never knew that. Yeah, we watched Finding Nemo. I don't think we watched it. Yeah, I did not saw that at school. Oh man. That's how I knew I liked movies.
And we're back. Some of us. Oh, now we're filing in. So what I want to start with in this second part is I want to briefly touch on some of those PDF files that I uploaded to the resources folder. There's just a couple of points I'd like to make on them. Oops, hang on one second here. Give me 1 second. Where is Savannah? There we are. Yeah, I don't know when. Oh, you just sent it. Okay, you just sent that message. I was like, oh, I missed this message. I see it. No problem. I definitely subscribe to the better late than never theory. So whenever you, and actually there was one other that I know is already coming late anyway. So I do obviously I prefer things earlier so we can discuss them and go over them. But if you turn in an assignment late, you will still get credit for it. So again, better late than never. All right. So I just want to make a couple of points. Let me share my screen here. So we're looking at these PDF files, and I kind of want to just go over a few of the things in them. What I like about the ISO sheet is that it kind of gives you some examples of when to use a particular ISO. So remember, your ISO is like the volume button on an amplifier. It's the sensitivity or gain or whatever, and it increases the sensitivity of the sensor, allows it to record an image in less light as the numbers go up. There is a trade-off. Obviously, it shows you that on the bottom, that the higher the numbers get, the more noise that you get in an image, so it's not going to be as crisp and sharp. But I like the fact that you kind of get an idea here that, you know, what the lower numbers are for and what the higher numbers are for. My rule of thumb that I'll give you is that you always want to use the lowest number possible for a given situation. In other words, don't just set your camera to ISO 6400 and say, wow, that's going to let a lot of light in, so I'm going to have a lot more flexibility with, you know, shutter speeds and f-stops and things like that. The problem is, like I said, that it does degrade the image as you go up in number. So you're always better off to use the lower numbers. My camera is almost always set to 200. I use that in the studio with electronic flash, and I use it outside. I will raise it when necessary, when the light levels get lower. I'll go down, I'll start at 400, go to 800. I'll go beyond that if I have to. But remember, and what this doesn't tell you, what this sheet doesn't tell you, is that these numbers, this is a very mathematical thing. As you double the number, you double the amount of light double the amount of sensitivity. So you cut in half the amount of light that's necessary to record an image. So if you're at ISO 100 and you just need one extra step in a shutter speed, maybe your shutter speed's too slow and you think if I just get one extra shutter speed, I'll be fine. Doubling your ISO from 100 to 200 will give you that. So from 100 to 200 doubles the sensitivity. From 200 to 400 doubles the sensitivity again. From 400 to 800 doubles the sensitivity. So each one of these, whether we're talking about aperture, shutter speed, or ISO, each step or stop, it's actually called a stop because of the f-stops, is either doubling or halving the amount of light that's being let into the camera or to the amount of sensitivity. So just keep that in mind. It's very math as far as shutter speed and ISO at least. When you double a number, then you've just doubled the amount of sensitivity. So let's look at, we'll go to shutter speed next since we just talked about that. Same thing applies. Now at the bottom, it's showing you obviously the slower the shutter, the more motion you're going to have in an image. But the same rule applies. If you're at a 60th of a second, and we're going to be talking about traditional normal shutter speeds, you can get any shutter speed in between, but if you're setting them manually on a camera, a 60th of a second is a very standard shutter speed. If you cut that to a 30th of a second, you've doubled the amount of light coming in camera. If you change instead from in that direction, but go to 125th of a second, you've cut it in half. So as you double the numbers, again, same thing as with the ISO, you're cutting the amount of light in half. The direction is in that original chart that we showed you, which is darker, which is brighter. This one just kind of gives you some guidelines for what you might want to look for in a shutter speed, depending on what you're shooting. Fireworks, obviously, you want a very slow shutter speed to allow that time to burn in and to do its thing. Let's move to aperture. And again, so this is just a little more of a rehash of that original chart that I showed you and uploaded. Shows you that physically, the wider an aperture is, it is brighter, allows more light in, but it also changes your depth of field. You get shallower, which means the backgrounds are blurrier. And that is, it's an effect that we want a lot of times, but it's not always what we want. So why, if you think about it, and you're always up against this, like, oh, my shutter speed's too slow, or my, whatever. Why wouldn't you just set your camera to allow as much light in as possible? Set your ISO to 6400, set your aperture to whatever the widest it is on your lens, and set your shutter speed to, a half second. That's going to let, a ton of light in all the time. Why wouldn't you do that?
I mean, you're just not going to get the best picture possible. And I think a lot of like with your aperture and stuff is situational, depending on like the light you have and what you're taking a picture of and how far away it is. And
yeah, you're right about all of that. The other thing is also that, first of all, technically it wouldn't work. Like if you're in a very dim lighting situation, doing that to your camera would definitely allow you to get a picture that you might not otherwise. But if you're outside in bright sunlight and you set your camera like that, your image is going to be very much overexposed. But the biggest reason is actually, and you kind of said it being situational, it depends on the creative decisions you want to make. Maybe you want the background to be in focus, maybe you don't. It depends on what it is. If you're shooting, a landscape, you probably want as much to be in focus as possible. If you're shooting a portrait, you want as little to be in focus as possible. So here's the way I attack it. Again, if you are working with a camera that allows this kind of control, either in manual or in aperture priority, which I'm going to show you that right here. These are your shooting modes. And again, these three, manual, shutter priority, and aperture priority, are really the only three you need to concern yourself with. In fact, you really only need two, manual and aperture priority, because you can prioritize your shutter speed even in the aperture priority mode. So those two are really the only ones you need to worry about. The rest of these, they just do things behind the scenes without even letting you know what it's doing. And so it doesn't give you the creative freedom. And that's what we're looking for, is creative freedom. So the first question I ask myself when I start shooting is, how much light do I have? And if I, looking at this, if I'm, maybe I'm outside, but it's getting very late in the day, I'm probably going to go to 400, maybe even 800 if the light's starting to drop. That's the first decision I make, is my ISO. The second decision, let me close this up, is my aperture. How much of my background do I want to be in focus? If I want a shallow depth of field, if I want the background to blur, I'm going to open that up to a wider setting. And then my shutter speed is going to fluctuate. If I'm in aperture priority mode, the camera is going to set the shutter speed to wherever it is, where it's necessary to be for the level of light that I have. If it's too slow, if my camera is set at f5.6 and my shutter speed is too slow, I just change my aperture to f4 and the shutter speed automatically decreases and makes it faster. If it's not enough, I go down to f2.8 and get an extra stop out of my shutter speed. So by controlling my aperture in aperture priority mode, the camera is going to automatically adjust the shutter speed in the opposite direction to give me a good exposure. So that's why I'm saying you can keep your eye on the shutter speed even when you're in aperture priority mode, and prioritize it that way. So that's sort of my thought process. ISO first, aperture second, then I look at the shutter speed. Is it too fast or too slow for what I want, and make adjustments as necessary to get it where I want. Now that sounds like a lot of work. The truth is, once you've been doing it for a while, it's almost instantaneous. It's very, very fast. You just literally set the aperture, quickly look at the numbers, maybe take a test shot, see if it's what you want, make an adjustment, and move on. Any questions on any of that? The creative decisions, like I said, are background blur, motion blur, and the amount of light that you have. Those three things control those, and they also control visually how the image looks. So if there aren't any questions, I'm going to move into the next phase of this, which is white balance. Now, those of you that have done any video work or working in the video track or whatever already understand a little bit about white balance and how it works as far as video is concerned. It's very similar with the camera, with the exception of typically I don't recommend using a white card to white balance. You can, that's typically what videographers use, but for a different reason. I personally like something gray in the midtones, because gray, black, and white are the same as far as digital imaging is concerned. They're all neutral, but gray isn't as dependent on my exposure. If I'm using a white card and my exposure is a little overexposed, it's not going to work, because that white card is already at the upper end of the range. If I'm using a black card and my image is a little underexposed, it's already too far down to the bottom. If I'm right in the middle, my exposure can be off a little bit one way or the other, and my white balance is still going to work. And white balance, again, at the bottom, it kind of gives you the situational white balances. I don't use any of those. I set my camera to a Kelvin temperature, which a lot of cameras do not have. So don't worry too much about that. You can set it to auto, and it's going to do a decent job of getting you in the ballpark, but it's never going to be perfect. And the problem with auto is that you can have two shots taken right after each other that are going to be different colors, because whatever's in the background has shifted a little bit. So you may have more of a color influence in one than you do another. Even though the lighting's the same, the color would be different. So I would recommend, if you're for the most part, if you're gonna set to one of these, I would experiment with either electronic flash or daylight, and just, that's going to give you about 80% of the time, it's going to give you a decent looking image as far as color is concerned. But let me show you what it'll do in a non perfect environment and how to correct for that. Let me stop sharing this. And I'm going back to Bridge. Okay, so I'm going to use this example that we touched on briefly in week 1 when we went through the keynote presentation. All right, so I'm going to select all of these images. I'm in Bridge. I just hit Command A to select all the images, Control A in Windows, and double click any one of them. And that will open. Are you guys seeing that? Are you seeing the image of the girl holding the gray card? Okay, good. So, because I am still in Bridge, but sometimes it'll knock me out when I do that. So I've got all these images that this is how they appeared on the back of the camera as I took them, because the camera was set to basically a daylight white balance, and the lighting in a situation like this is very warm. Our brain does a really good job of not seeing this. It compensates for it, even though it's there, but the camera does see it as it actually is. So what do I do to combat this? Well, before the ceremony even starts, I just take a gray card like this. Again, I could have used these steps back here. I could have used the crash. Well, the aisle runner wasn't out at that point, but I could have used a couple of things in this image. I could have even used her gray coat. But the gray card is something that is specifically manufactured to be neutral, so I know I can trust it. And in some editing software like this, Lightroom will do it, Photoshop will do it, the software that came with your camera will do it. They all have the capability of doing this if, and here's the big if your camera is capable of shooting a RAW file as opposed to a JPEG. A JPEG is sort of an end product. Even though you can make adjustments to it, you don't have the same level of detail, the same amount of information, and the same editing headroom that a RAW file does. A RAW file simply records everything that the camera sees. It doesn't make any decisions. It doesn't change the file in any way. A JPEG actually is processed as you take the picture. The camera software processes that file based on all of your camera settings, and that's what it spits out. And that's pretty much what you've got. You can't make the same level of changes that you can to a RAW file. So with my RAW files, and that's what these are, I would simply select all of these images again, Command or Control A, and you can see along the bottom of this film strip, they're all selected now. And I would just take, there's an eyedropper tool in this processor. This is Adobe Camera Raw. This comes with Photoshop. And I would just take that eyedropper and move it onto the gray card, and watch when I click, not only does that image change, but all of my thumbnails along the bottom will change because they're all selected. Okay, so now I'm just gonna, while they're selected, I'm gonna take a different image and look at it and say, is that good? Is that what I want? I know it's neutral. I know that if I looked at the numbers in something that is supposed, let me go back to that original. If I put my eyedropper there and I look at my red, green, and blue numbers up near my histogram, they're 108, 108, and 110. As I move them around, they're going to change slightly, but they're always going to be within a point or two of each other. So I know it's neutral, but do I really want neutral? In this case, no. In this case, I like a little bit of warmth in an image. And since they're all selected, I only have to do this once. I would just take the temperature slider and drag it slightly to the right, warm that image up a little bit, and it updates all of the other ones automatically because they're selected. So that's all there is to white balancing. If you are capable of shooting RAW files, you literally only need to do one step, well, 2 steps if you tweak it. One is to click on something neutral in your image while all of the images that are shot under the same lighting are selected. That white balances all your images. And then if you want to tweak it a little bit, move your temperature or tint slider or both, until you get just the color you want, and bang, they're all updated perfectly. All right, I'm going to cancel out of this. And so here is, all right, I was hoping it didn't update these. Here are some, it's the same image, and all I did was change the setting on the camera. This one, the third one, I think is set to fluorescent. One of them is set to daylight. One of them is set to electronic flash. And you can see they're all just a little bit different in color. So I can just select those, open them in this raw file processor. This is Adobe Camera Raw. While they're all selected, take that eyedropper, find something that's neutral, but is not overly bright or overly dark. Like I wouldn't use the darkest black in his hat. I wouldn't use the whitest white in the body. But if I come into the middle of the body and click, look at the thumbnails underneath. They're all now identical. In fact, I'll hit done and you'll see them in Bridge. See how they just updated? So it doesn't matter if you're shooting a raw file, it does not matter what your camera is set to. You literally could set it to fluorescent and all your images would look pink. Doesn't matter if you can come in and with one click change these. You can do this with a JPEG file, but not without some problems. You don't have the editing headroom and it is going to degrade the file slightly. And you also do not have the range that you do in a raw file. Raw file gives you way more range. Let me show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to look at a couple of images here as far as editing is concerned. Let's take this one. And I'll open that in Camera Raw. This is also in Aruba, by the way. You happen to see this restaurant when you were there? This is a really, you might not recognize it from this picture because it's the original shot is so horrible. But the camera sort of jumped in the middle. It was like, well, it's really bright outside. This is an indoor-outdoor open-air restaurant. It's really bright outside and it's really dark inside. So it kind of split the middle and kind of gave us the best that it could, but it's not perfect. So let me show you what, and the controls are different here because this was shot with an older camera. But let me show you what some of the options are to correct this file really quickly. First, I'm going to work on the background. Then I'm going to work on the foreground, bring a little bit of detail there, put a little more black in the blacks, bring the exposure down a little bit, play with a couple of other adjustments. Let's bring the brightness down. Now that background is snapped into focus, let's take the fill light up to bring the foreground up a little more and add a little, either a little more contrast or a little more black. And then let's pull the exposure up just a touch. So if I do a before and after, let me get that up here. Oops, wrong one. Oh, it just took away all of my adjustments. Sorry about that. Let's try that again. It's funny, it's giving me access to the new controls, even though this is an older file. Let's pull those highlights down. Okay, so that gets us a lot better. You can see the before and after here at least, and how much detail is actually recorded by the camera. But if I shot this as a JPEG and let the camera do the processing, the image on the left is what I would get. I would not have the range of control to bring back the way it is on the right. And the color balance is a little off, so we're just going to warm that up a little bit. There, that's a little more like what it should look like. But again, if I were doing this on a JPEG, I could get a little bit of detail back, but no way could I get all of that. Look at the hanging plants in the upper part of the image, how dark they are on the left, how bright they are on the right, the backs of the chairs. Everything is just balanced a whole lot better. And the funny thing is your camera records all of this, but if you're not shooting in RAW, you're kind of cheating yourself out of the ability to very, very quickly bring this back. Let me cancel this. And let's look at another image. So this is one that again, because my camera is always set for a daylight setting, this was very late in the evening, so there's a lot of ultraviolet light in the atmosphere at that point. We weren't near any direct sun or anything, so we don't have the warmth from that. It actually looks a little bit cool. So again, I can take the eyedropper, find something that I know should be white, click on that, and then kind of adjust it to my taste. And then I can work on the details, bring the highlights down, maybe the shadows up a little bit, bring the blacks in. And I'll cancel this. I'll show you what the before and after looks like. I think I've got it in the wrong folder. Yeah, I do. So that's the before and after. There's been some retouching done as well. But as far as color balance and detail, look at the difference between right and left. And it literally probably took about 10 seconds and a few sliders to bring that into play. So we have all of this control at our fingertips if we have the ability to shoot a raw file and if we have software that does this. Like I said, Photoshop does it, Lightroom does it. If your camera shoots raw files, it likely came with some type of software that will process raw files as well. May not be as good. In fact, I'm guarantee it won't be as good, but it'll still get you this level of adjustment, the ability to do this. Any questions on that as far as white balance are concerned? It is it's a very subjective thing, what looks right to your eye. So I typically will use the eyedropper and click somewhere. So I know that that is now neutral, but then I'll decide, oh, is that a little off or, isn't it? There's an image where originally looks very warm because it's lit with incandescent lighting and the camera again is set for the daylight. This is the original raw file. That's the JPEG of it. And look at the adjusted, let me get the raw file and the adjusted file side by side. Look at the detail in the water in the background. In fact, it's very subtle, but there's a lot of change in detail all throughout that image. And again, I would never have gotten that. This is the adjusted JPEG, which is now on the right-hand side, and the adjusted raw file is in the middle. Look at the difference in the water. You can see all the highlights that are still blown out in that JPEG. And believe me, I massaged that file as much as I could to get it to look like that. And I could never get it as close as it should be to that raw file. All right, let me stop that. So I just wanted to kind of touch on, again, because we're going to talk about this a lot, aperture, shutter speed, ISO, and start to introduce the new object here, which is white balance. So I have to figure out a little something, because I know not all of you are still working with cameras that allow the functionality. And I'd really like to move into this white balance phase and have you create something and show me the before and after, before you white balance that, and after all of the adjustments. But you, again, between the cameras and the fact that you may not have access to any software to do this yet, I'm a little challenged by that. So I think I'm going to give you a completely different assignment. I just have to figure out what that is. I want to keep it in the same vein as what we're doing, but what I would normally do, I don't think is going to work in this case, because we just we don't have a level playing field. We're not all on the same page yet. So let me figure out what that is. I will post it. I'll actually post the assignment tonight, and we'll take a look at that next week. The second half of the semester, we're going to have a lot more fun assignments, I'll tell you that. The first half is really more about the technical stuff. But once you get that down, you'll be able to soar a little bit more creatively. But you guys are doing really good so far. I mean, looking at some of the images that you've submitted for a beginning class is pretty impressive. And I think even the ones that aren't that great, I think you understand why and what to do about it and how to change it and things like that. So I'm very encouraged. So far, I think we've got a really good class here. You guys are really putting out some effort on this, so I appreciate that. Are there any questions at all before we give you the 11 minutes back that we normally have in this class? This was one of our, I mean, this class will tend to run near the time limit every week, just simply because there's so many of us and we have a lot of images to look through. But I think at least, especially early on in the semester, looking at your images and critiquing your images, you're probably going to learn way more than you are by me showing you facts and figures and all that kind of stuff. So we'll spend as much time as necessary on that. Plus, I like to see what you guys are into, like, you know, where you've been, what you've done, what's important to you. That says a lot about, you know, I guess about a person in general, but you know, it gives me a little bit of insight into how your thought process works. So I enjoy that. All right, guys, that'll finish us up for another week. Again, watch your email for the announcement later. As soon as I figure out what I'm going to have you do, maybe it'll come to me over dinner, and we'll let you know. Anything anybody want to throw at me before we end it up? Nope, you just want to get the hell out of here. I don't blame you. All right, guys, we'll see you next week.